This conference will now be recorded.
a very awkward and difficult fit for the city of Tampa, which I'll be explaining. Thank you. In our meetings with the city has stated there are three primary goals for the evaluation and implementation of reclaimed water projects using discharge from their wastewater treatment plant. Number one, they need to provide minimum flows to the Hillsborough River when there otherwise would be no flow over the dam. Until the 70s, there was always flow over the dam, but increasing water use, we start to get no flow days here in recent years. They also want to drought-proof the reservoir. In other words, they want to supplement potable water supplies when the reservoir is low. And they need to meet the requirements of Senate Bill 64, which requires eliminating how often will the reclaimed water be needed for minimum flows or to supplement potable supplies. What we have here is a bar graph by year of no flow days at the dam. So the other side, which you don't see, would be flows at the dam. It can vary tremendously. The flows in the Hillsborough River vary tremendously between wet years and dry years. In a dry year like 2000, there could be 300 days of no flow, but in 2004, it's only like 20 days. And look at 2000, I think it's 2014 and 15. In both of those days, no flow days were only 30 to 35 days. Stated another way, there would have been flow over the dam in those years for 330 days during a year for 2 years in a row. So the question becomes, during these periods, you don't need reclaimed water for minimum flows. You don't need to supplement water supply in a reservoir. Where are you going to put that water? Now, the city said, well, we can do a massive aquifer storage recovery operation, various operations. But it became clear to our group that there needs to be variances. This is sort of water management 101. When you're using a river water supply, there's going to be wet years and dry years. The demand for reclaimed water will be much greater in a dry year. So we actually proposed statute as a utility may apply to the department that DEP for year variances. They could state an average, but on a yearly basis would say we didn't meet that reason for this particular reason or that. Not only the fact between wet and dry years, receiving water, you might have a constituent concentration in your receiving water, and you would like to back off. So anyway, we think there need to be variances to this average value, whatever average value established. Also, Senate Bill 64 allows service discharges to continue if certain conditions exist. The first four in white are kind of minor, but the one in orange is very important. It says the discharge provides direct ecological or public supply benefits, such as rehydrating wetlands or meeting the minimum flows and levels or recovery or prevention strategies. Well, in the summer of 2022, the city of Tampa Water Department in our meetings put on the table, are there ecological benefits of discharge from their wastewater treatment plant to Tampa Bay? Keep in mind, their discharge is replacing water that would have flowed to the bay from the Tampa Bypass Canal or the Hillsborough River. So in that regard, I wrote a report. I wrote a report late in the summer of 2022 and sent the first draft to the City of Tampa Water Department, and they reviewed it and made quite a number of some changes, that kind of thing, which I all agreed to. And then later I submitted various drafts to them, which they all approved. In November of 2022, the Water Department sent this to the Southwest District Office of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The Water Department was clear and said, we're not taking a position on this, but we are asking you to determine that. And here's a part of the front page of my report and a couple of graphs from it. The top graph shows that, Hillsborough Bay has actually been meeting its nitrogen loading targets for the last 20 years, chlorophyll A and line attenuation targets. It's about a 20-page report. It's interesting. I would also add that Tony Janicki saw an early draft of my report and wrote some comments to it, said, well, you didn't look at total and that sort of thing. And both of these documents were submitted to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection early November 2022. Well, the Southwest District declined recognition of the ecological benefits of this discharge to Tampa Bay. And it was a very short email exchange. And I think what they say here is important. This is a quote from their very brief through implementation of minimum flows and minimum water level requirements. Marine discharges do not have an MFL classification. Therefore, the discharge of the Howard F. Current until 64 DEP didn't do a technical assessment of freshwater flow benefits or the nutrient budget or anything to Tampa Bay. This is based on somebody in Temple Terrace's interpretation of Senate Bill 64. If you don't have a minimum flow established for a water body, Senate Bill 64 doesn't apply. Well, the fact that a discharge occurs downstream of the mouth of the river does not negate all of its benefits. So our group proposed language to the statute that could allow for such things. The language in white is straight from the statute I'm referring to, and we suggest adding the language in yellow. For water bodies that do not currently have such management plans or regulations, including estuarine waters, the department may recognize the ecological benefits of such surface water discharges to a water body based on data or other information for that system. We think Tampa Bay qualifies in that regard. The fact that the city's discharge is 2.5 miles immediately out downstream of the mouth of the river, this should be considered. And the Tampa Water Department was willing to put that particular subject on the table. I think if we do acknowledge that benefits of this discharge, it really opens up a lot of flexibility on how the city of Tampa can meet the requirements of Senate Bill 64. So the overall goal of recommendations from our group are for clarifications and improved regulatory procedures for the application of Senate Bill 64 to the city of Tampa. And what we're saying in orange is very important. It will give the city of Tampa the operational flexibility to evaluate and implement reclaimed water projects in quantities that are truly needed, cost-effective, safe, and protective of the region's water and natural resources. The first thing will be the requirement to eliminate 50 MGD by 2032 should be discontinued. And the proposals we're suggesting would allow for yearly variances to average quantity of discharge that must be eliminated and rerouted. These discharges could vary on a seasonal basis. It could vary between wet and dry years. We think this is critical. For a utility that uses the river for water supply, they not be held to a strict average. There be variances. Thirdly, acknowledge the beneficial role of freshwater discharge from the city's AWT plant to Tampa Bay. Our proposal, this is extremely important slide. Our proposal does not preclude the pursuit of reclaimed water projects or nutrient reduction strategies for Tampa Bay. Under this plan, on a yearly basis, we will evaluate and submit plans to the FDEP for reclaimed water projects that may reroute some AWT discharge. It may or may not. If they got a good use for it and is economically feasible, proceed. These quantities can increase over time as new beneficial uses for reclaimed water are identified. So rather than saying you got to do something with 50 MGD in 8.5 years, let's evaluate this on a yearly basis. Does Tampa Bay water want any of the water? Look at the options as they become available. The elimination of discharges to Tampa Bay will be accompanied by assessments of the proposed plan on freshwater inflow and nutrient budgets, salinity, water quality, and the biological characteristics of the bay. Now, if the quantities they want to divert are fairly small, I think we can largely rely on existing information. If they are larger, there should be new assessments of this, looking at the nutrient and freshwater flow budgets and on the biological characteristics. Now, I want to say this, in all likelihood, even though we recognize the benefits of this discharge, it's very likely that a good portion of it can be diverted with acceptable impacts. But the flip side of that coin is, if the remaining discharge continues to flow to Tampa Bay, that's probably okay too. Again, this will be subject to detail analyses as reclaimed water projects come up. And this last one I think is very important. Apart from reclaimed water projects, nutrient reduction strategies can be pursued if needed. Such actions. So we've prepared a draft technical document that describes this plan and these proposals. and we haven't distributed widely yet. You're getting kind of a sneak preview today because of the timing of this meeting. But we will to various parties in the Tampa Bay region for review and comment. And we think that there could be greater statewide or regional application may be possible. But the emphasis at this time is on the city of Tampa's discharge of their advanced wastewater treatment plant in relation to new reclaimed water projects for the city and managing the quality of Tampa Bay. So again, presenting groups, and we will have a technical document about 12 pages. We'd be happy for everyone to review and get comments on. So thanks very much for your time. Any questions if you like? Maya or Ed?
There's time for questions. Not seeing any. You're welcome to stay and wait for the discussion on that topic later and potentially answer questions at that point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good.
Control, give me just a second.
Next item on the agenda is the quarterly financial report.
At your place, on the agenda packet under page 9 is our quarterly financial report through quarter 3 of this fiscal year 2023, which runs through June 30th, 2023. As I've been briefing the boards at the prior board meetings, we're expecting a lot of these projects expenses to come in towards the tail end of the fiscal year, and that's certainly the case with this Q3 fiscal year report. We're only about 50% in terms of revenues and expenses for the year. That again is an expectation of some larger project closing out at the end of the fiscal year. Since this actually developed for the board packet, we actually had about $500,000 of expenses come in, reflected in the final budget that we'll present at the December meeting, and we'll be a little bit closer to the budgeted numbers that were approved at the mid-year last May. Only other thing I wanted to note is that we're still a little bit over in terms of printing costs. We're actually going to probably go a little bit over with some printing from the economic evaluation, but we're slightly under on a budget, other office supplies and other line items, so we're able to cover those costs under those expense line items. Other than that, it's a fairly straightforward quarterly report for the period ending June 30th. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you all might have.
Any questions for Ed? Okay. Seeing none, this is an action item. Can I have a motion to recommend that we recommend to the policy board to accept the quarterly financial report? Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? None, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next item is the initial fiscal year 2024 program-wide budget.
So this is on page 11 of your packet, and this is basically going to outline expenses that we anticipate for fiscal year 2024, which we begin on October 1st. So basically, those projects that were not completed in this fiscal year, we factored in some of those costs. Like I said, we're expecting some expenses to be incurred towards the tail end of this fiscal year, but any projects that weren't anticipated for completion and budgeted in fiscal year 2023 basically roll into this new initial program-wide budget for fiscal year 2024. And this program-wide budget encompasses all our active EPA grants, as well as our TBERT projects, Bay Mini and additional external grants that come into the program, and what we anticipate in terms of activity for the 2023 through September 30th, 2024. So overall, we're expecting about $3.5 million in expenses in fiscal year 2024, and they're outlined on the bottom half of that page. I did want to make note that we're programming in increases to our personnel cost, to the tune of about 10.7%, and that encompasses mandatory contribution increases to the FR system. It also includes a part-time position that we're looking to fill to help out with our administrative work with the program, Stephanie Spracklen-Kern left in May, so we're looking to fill that position in the new fiscal year, so there's some funds reserved there. I also want to mention that I did factor in up to a 7% increase across the board of personnel salaries, and this was to be commensurate with some of the increases we've heard that the governments around the region have entertained for their personnel. So this is in line with water management DEP and our municipal governments in terms of salary increases for staff. And this would be contingent on individual performance evaluations that I conduct with staff leading up to the fiscal year. The other thing I wanted to mention is our travel costs for the next fiscal year are slightly higher than what we had budgeted in fiscal year 2023. That's to accommodate our larger staff to attend meetings and also participate or disseminate our science both at regional and national forums. This will allow each of our staff to participate in at least one of those meetings in fiscal year 2024. And this again is just part of our growth and trying to encourage our staff to get out there and share our science and communication strategies. There's also in that travel line item cost associated with the National Science Foundation grant that we're working collaboratively with researchers in Iowa. So there's some program travel and sharing that's coming from that grant as well. So that is related to those potential increases that I'm proposing for fiscal year 2024. And then the last sort of item I wanted to mention relates to our accounting and payroll services. This was a discussion that we had at the May board meeting when we approved our annual work plan. We're expecting to have some overlap with our current accounting service contract provider and the new service contract provider that we will bring on board in the new fiscal year.
You've been in and out the whole time. I'm so sorry.
Wireless and internet connection issues, so I apologize for that. But overall, budget is fairly straightforward, and like I said, about $3.5 million in expenses we're anticipating in fiscal year 2024, covered by about 3.1 in revenues, and the shortfall would basically come from revenues we've already collected in prior fiscal years to make up the full cost. So again, looking at about $3.5 million in activity for fiscal year 2024. I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you had any specific questions on the fiscal year 2024 initial budget.
Questions for Ed? The action recommended is to recommend the policy board adopt the initial fiscal year 2024 program-wide budget. Motion. Second. Any further discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
We do have some coffee if you guys need it.
The next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2024 legal services amendment.
So this begins on page 12 of the packet. This is basically to consider an amendment to the existing legal service contract that we have with Don Kahn. Don was gracious enough to consider working with us for another year under the same terms and conditions. So we're just asking for approval to amend that contract through the period of December 31st, 2024. Be happy to entertain any questions on that one.
Questions? Okay. Action recommended is that we recommend the policy board approve the legal services agreement amendment with Kahn and Buenaventura, PA for the period of January 1, 2024 to December 31, 2024. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
We have a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. Next item, fiscal year 2023 to 2027 independent auditor.
So this item begins on page 13 of the packet, and this is in relation to the increased auditing cost that we were quoted last year. This comes on the heels of asking for quotes for our fiscal year 2022 audit and looking for a long-term commitment among auditing firms within the region. We actually went out for quotes for these services between July 5th and July 28th. We received 3 quotes. The one lowest bid quote was from Rivero Gadamer and Company, and they actually performed our fiscal year 2022 audit. So my recommendation is to work with Rivero Gadamer for our fiscal year 2023 audit, as well as audits through 2027, because they provided the lowest quote from the 3 firms over that time period. I'd be happy to entertain any questions on this item.
No questions? This is a 2-part thing. Do I take them both at the same time or?
Yeah, you can.
So the action recommended is for the management board to recommend to the policy board to authorize the executive director to negotiate an annual agreement for the fiscal year 2023 audit with Rivero Gadamer and Company for an amount not to exceed $26,000. And part B, to also recommend to the policy board to authorize the executive director to renew the grant agreement for up to 4 additional years pending annual Tampa Bay Estuary Program work plan approval by the policy board. Questions?
So does that mean whatever rate you negotiate for fiscal year 23 audit would be the same rate if renewal, or what each year you would have to negotiate the rate?
We allowed cost escalation in the quotes, and given that, Rivero Gadamer was still the lowest quote among the 3 we received, so we'd probably negotiate their quoted rate for the next 4 years and program that into our budget as we present it each annual fiscal year.
So you would negotiate the first rate and then there would be a cost escalation.
Based on what they quoted us, yeah.
Thank you.
Question.
Yep.
In future, is it that been looked at to negotiate the first agreement with automatic renewals unless such time as both parties decide not to renew? That way we don't have to do 2 parts.
We never have done it that way, but if you're entertaining a friendly amendment to the motion, I think we would consider that.
Just for discussion, right? We've done agreements like that in other agencies and it works out well. Maybe a slight change on how the agreement structure is. If the board is willing to entertain that as a modification, the agreement that's automatic renewal, and you don't have to do it every time.
Yeah, I think right now we're good in terms of heading that route. If the auditing costs exceed my authority to enter into contract where we actually have to go out for another RFP, which is the $35,000 level, then that would be the one thing to consider in that motion.
Are you proposing, would the automatic renewals have a specified rate of increase?
Yeah, so the automatic renewal will be for the amount authorized with the cost inflation allowance, unless such time that it exceeds it, then I'll have to come back to the board. That way you don't, it's not an every year batch, it's less room on staff.
Sound like an improvement to you, or?
It's just for discussion.
Yeah, it's a discussion amongst the management board. If they want us to proceed that way, you would have to vote on that.
Right,
amendment
okay.
to part B.
Discussion?
So would that be something, Ed, that you'd be able to roll in? I guess that would be my question. Could you do it at the point?
I think what I heard from Bajesh is that part B of the action would be to recommend the policy board authorize the executive to renew the agreement until such time as costs do not exceed $35,000, pending annual TDEP work plan approval by the policy board.
That would be the simplest way, that's correct.
That's up for discussion on the next board.
So in that situation, there wouldn't be a time cap? keep going as long as the cost was.
It will still be up to the full term of the contract for the 4 years. So we'll never, yeah,
Is the benefit of that, are there any risks or cost increases that you're aware of result from that?
well, I mean, at this point, and I mean, we're just talking from how we've done contracts previously. We've actually rolled it into the actual agreement that it's an automatic renewal so that we don't have to execute our general services agreement each year. So it's just automatic rollover with the cost of inflation, and each year we get the updated cost and process that with the revised authorization method. In this case, you just have the administrative ability to approve it so long as the threshold stays with management board prevail. I mean, we could revert back and have that as a separate discussion and just keep this the way it is, just to keep it simple. And in future agreements, we could discuss that if it makes more sense to the board rather than just throwing it out there right now. I'm perfectly comfortable. It's fine. Like the roof would feel.
So is it a 5-year contract off the bat and you just negotiate the
No.
price every year? No,
It
the
would-
1-year contract and then you renew it each year.
Yeah, or up to 4 additional.
But you could do a 5-year contract that automatically renews each year, including with the
I
increase.
would be a little hesitant about an automatic renewal with up to that 35,000 because I would want to know what the cost escalation beyond what they've quoted for fiscal year 2027 might be.
Yeah.
So that's why I think negotiating with them, indefinitely until we reach that $35,000 threshold, I'm comfortable with that.
Maybe we leave it as is, and that's just something that you consider for other contracts that don't have that might make your life easier in the future.
Yeah. If he's presenting that as amendment to item B, then
I think we're at the point where we're not going to amend item B.
Yeah, we'll leave it the way it is to simplify. Having a full discussion right now, this has worked in the past. And as you work on, discuss it as, possibility of a solution, and we can bring it up on that point. But for now, this needs to go fully understand it the way it is.
As written.
Yeah.
Any further discussion or questions for Ed? Okay, I don't even have a motion yet. So the actions recommended are as previously stated with no changes. Do you have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes as recommended. Okay. The next item 8, the bipartisan infrastructure law long-term plan amendment. Ed again.
So on page 14 of your packet, we're outlining some recommended changes to the bipartisan infrastructure law long-term plan that we were adopted and approved at the last May board meeting. We were including the long-term plan as part of our work plan to streamline adoption middle to EPA, which was due to, this long-term plan was due to EPA on June 1st. Since that time, we've had some conversation with partners and are requesting the board consider some minor changes and revisions to the projects that we've outlined in that long-term plan. The first one is fairly straightforward. The Coopers Point Tidal Circulation Master Plan project by the City of Clearwater was originally identified under theme 2 of the long-term plan, and that was related to wastewater restoration projects. We're proposing to move that from theme 2 to theme 1, which includes Tidal Creek restoration and living shoreline restoration, and that is in response to changes to that overall master plan for the Coopers Point site. They're not going to be using reclaimed water in that restoration project, but they're still going to pursue additional tidal circulation, mangrove improvements, as well as considering other shoreline improvements along Coopers Point. So we're still supporting that project. It's just identified now under the theme 1 projects in the long-term plan. The second change that I wanted to highlight is in relation to the projects we identified as wastewater infrastructure improvement projects. And this came to us from the city of Largo. They were proposing to remove their discharge to the Feather Sound Golf Course. And that removal of that discharge to the golf course was estimated to reduce nitrogen loading to Old Tampa Bay by about 19 tons if they saw the full discharge go through the golf course system. So we thought that was a very immediate and direct benefit for some of the issues we're facing in the Old Tampa Bay segment, particularly in the Feather Sound region where we lost and could potentially gain back about 1,000 acres of seagrass. It's a fairly significant nutrient load that goes into the Feather Sound Golf Course, which they use for some of their irrigation needs, but otherwise flows through and goes to the mangrove system and ultimately out to that Feather Sound region, the Old Tampa Bay. So given those improvements to nitrogen loads in the Old Tampa Bay segment, we're recommending support for that project in lieu of support for the private sewer lateral rebate program that we identified under those Theme 2 projects. So basically switching support for that City of Largo project. We do have City of Largo reps here to speak about that project if there's any questions from the management board. But again, I think it's in line with the tenets of the CCMP and our continued efforts to improve water quality and seagrass conditions in the Old Tampa Bay segment, and probably we would reap more immediate results than the private sewer lateral rebate program. If there's concern that we're not supporting that private sewer lateral rebate program in the bill funding, we can program that into our annual work plan for subsequent fiscal year 2025 and 2026 work plan. We'd be happy to do that so that there isn't any concern for loss of potential resources for that regional program as it's developed by each of our municipal partners. So I'll stop there and entertain any questions you might have on this long-term plan. The only last thing I wanted to mention is that we would submit basically a proposal to EPA for amendment to our existing bill grant for fiscal year 2024 projects, none of which are listed here in the tables, but there are 3 Tidal Creek projects that we would propose for the fiscal year 2024 bill funding, and those remain the same. It's only these changes to the latter years, 2025 and 2026 is what we're proposing right now. And we would basically submit that in the year next October and the following October and October 2025 for those funds. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions about that process to update the bill long-term plan and then actually submit an application for that funding through EPA if there are any.
So the request won't be submitted until, from October?
Yeah, these projects are the changes that we're proposing are for projects that we targeted for the years 2025 and 2026. The existing projects that we identified last May for the 3rd year of funding remain the same.
So if we have the representative from the City of Largo, can we have a quick overview of the project?
Absolutely.
That would be doable.
Yeah, wherever you're.
That would be great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shelby Boozman from the City of Largo. I am the Environmental Services Director. So I did actually want to talk about our contrast to the project that was presented this morning. We do want to acknowledge the beneficial uses of our water as a supplemental water source, but I want to note that City of Largo does not have drinking water. We don't supply drinking water. Pinellas County does as the purchase from Tampa Bay. So that's kind of one of our contrasts from the project discussed earlier. We discharge about 12 million gallons total. 6 million goes to the bay, 6 goes to reclaimed water on average in a year. Our permit is for 19 tons. We just exited our consent order with DEP, which started in 2006. So we're excited to be completed with those projects. So we're looking to the next, which is eliminating our surface water discharge. So we hope to eliminate about 19 tons. It depends on what the well will hold for capacity. We actually do have 2 wells going in. So we absolutely think that except for hurricane situations or some other extreme weather, we should be able to put everything down the well or to our reclaimed water system. So yes, we are really hoping that that changes things for Old Tampa Bay. We do realize chlorophyll A is not to the levels that we want it, and as Ed Sherwood had mentioned, the seagrass is also declining in that area. So open to any questions. Were there other options explored versus the deep well injection is what it sounds like it's going to be? So unfortunately, we did look at expanding our reclaimed water system, but during dry weather, so this winter, and actually I think a few of the ones since I got here, we come very close to running out of our reclaimed water. So short of an incredibly large storage tank for our reclaimed water during the wet season so that it could be used in the dry season, we weren't able to expand our reclaimed water system. We also looked at potentially pairing with Bel Air, who is having well concerns. They are connecting to the county, unfortunately, so we were thinking of having a salinity barrier for their wells, but they'll just be connecting their water. They won't be supplying water themselves anymore. We did discuss our project with, or our effluent with Tampa Bay Water, but they did not have the need either for our water, so we did explore other sources. Did I miss anything, team?
No, and will remain open to potable reuse direct or indirect after the injection wells are in. We believe in highest and best use of this really important resource. And Tampa Bay Water indicated that their focus for a number of years is in Hillsborough, and they believe they may come back and address an old water situation in South Pinellas County in 2035, and we've offered them space at our plant for a direct reuse of our water into an RO plant to provide a fresh, clean, updated water source to blend and hopefully satisfy their old water problem. So we'll always remain open to potable reuse even after our injection wells are in. Unfortunately, as a previous commenter mentioned, our deadline is January 1st, 2032. There is not a lot of times for municipalities to solve this problem by the deadline. We see we're under design right now, we're under permitting right now. We see once we're approved of a permit and funded in 25, 26, we see this as a 3.5, 4-year process. So there isn't a lot of margin for error to meet this extremely short deadline.
Are the injection wells located in Largo?
Yes, they will be at our treatment plant. So we are actually able to maximize resources. We're using our effluent pumps to pump down into one well, which is right near our discharge pump station. And then another well will be located near our reclaim tank. So we actually, I don't think, are purchasing many pumps as part of this project besides our jockey pumps. So it's both on our site. So minimizing piping as well as part of the project.
Is the challenge that you're seeing primarily the procurement and construction sequence? Is the challenge that you're seeing primarily the procurement and construction period?
That's what keeps me up at night, is because everyone in the state of Florida has that same deadline. We believe, we're concerned our $21.5 million investment may not be $1.5 million when we competitively bid the drill work. There are only so many, and I'll just say this politely, qualified, quality, deep injection well drillers in the state of Florida. and they'll all be competing for every municipality that has the same situation as the city of Largo. That's why our goal is to be as fast in the process as possible to get into the bidding process before and ahead of everybody else competing for these same drillers in the state. What we don't want to have to entertain is drillers from other industries around the country coming to Florida that may not have experience in the aquifer or drilling deep injection wells that aren't petroleum wells or other things like that.
So just as a thought process, so we've seen that on, particularly the pumps, you're looking at long lead times on these pumps now, and also the casings. So just as a thought process, you may want to take a look at the construction manager approach as opposed to a hard bid. That will shorten your time and that will give you an early procurement. So even though you're finalizing the GMP to actually do construction, you can go ahead and advance purchase your steel shafts.
Keep right in our mind. So the well will be with a contract, will be a well driller. Surface piping would potentially be with a CMAR. We did put CMAR bids out for here just last month. We got one bid and it was an unqualified CMAR. So we'll continue to attempt on that.
And we're also having a long construction period so that the driller feels comfortable putting us into their schedule. We don't want to have that be the constraint, or the lead time of items, like you mentioned. We want to give them any cushion so that they feel comfortable bidding on our project and successfully completing it.
Additional questions? Thank you. Any other questions for Ed before we vote on? Okay. The motion, the action is to recommend to the policy board to authorize the executive director to submit the amended bipartisan infrastructure law bill, long-term plan to the EPA for consideration of funding under an amended cooperative agreement. Do I have a motion? So motion, second? I lost track. There was a motion and a second?
I heard Brajesh make the second. Who made the motion?
I heard a motion.
He did the motion. We need a second. So is there a second? Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Motion, second.
So it was Chris or Brandon?
I made the second.
Oh, thank you.
Chris made the second, sorry.
It's okay.
That's hard to keep up with, Maya.
I'm doing my best.
It's like an auction. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Motion passes. Okay, item 9 on the agenda, the Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment Contractor Selection.
So as you all know, we've been talking a lot about Old Tampa Bay and the issues that it's been struggling with over the past few years. And when we submitted the reasonable assurance plan for Tampa Bay back in December to the US EPA and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, one of the corrective actions that the Nitrogen Management Consortium proposed was to reevaluate the assimilative capacity of the Old Tampa Bay segment, which has not been meeting its chlorophyll targets for many of the past few. However, the total nitrogen load to that bay segment has remained under the allocations that are allowable to all of the entities. And so this indicates that there is an ecological shift that's going on in that particular bay segment, and there's potentially a disconnect between the management paradigm that we've used to successfully restore seagrasses and improve water quality throughout the bay for the past more than 30 years. So this is sort of the first step in addressing this new challenge that we're seeing in Old Tampa Bay. So between June and August, we put out a request for proposals for a technical support contractor to help us look at that Old Tampa Bay and determine an appropriate approach to reassessing the assimilative capacity of that bay segment. Unfortunately, once we had the deadline came and went, we only received one proposal in response to that request for proposals. The proposal was from the firm Geosyntec, and they assembled a multi-entity team, including folks from Janicki Environmental, Wildwood Consulting, and a representative from Environmental Science and Associates. So we had an evaluation committee meet on August 9th to evaluate the quality of the proposal that was submitted based on criteria that was outlined in the request for proposals. And you can see here in the handout in front of you at your place, you can see the representatives that served on that committee. We had a representative from the Estuary Program, from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, from Hillsborough County as the co-chair of the Nitrogen Management Consortium, and from the Southwest Florida Water Management District. In their review of the proposal that we received, there are basically two main points that I want to highlight. The first, their finding was that the firm's qualifications, the project team qualifications, this was a highly qualified team. They're some of the best in the business. They do this work not just for our watershed, but for watersheds all across the state. And so there were no reservations in terms of the quality and the qualifications of the team that came forward. However, the evaluation committee did express serious reservations about the approach that was described in the proposal that we received. They noted several important deficiencies that they had expressed numerous concerns over. These deficiencies related to the approach, for the lack of proposing any alternative paradigms or ways to assess the effectiveness of those alternative paradigms, given the rapid ecological shifts that we are observing in Old Tampa Bay. There was no explicit addressing that apparent disconnect between the chlorophyll A, the response variable, and the nitrogen load levels that we're managing for. And they didn't propose any alternative methods beyond those modeling tools and existing approaches that the consortium and the program is very familiar with for assessing those management paradigms overall. And then there wasn't sufficient attention paid to consider alternative drivers for that ecological change, things like rainfall, sea level rise, temperature change, hydraulic alterations, and interspecies competition from things like macroalgae. These concerns and reservations is what we spent the majority of the evaluation committee meeting time discussing. And as a result of those conversations at that evaluation committee, and some important comments I think made and shared by all of the committee members relating to our role as a region being setting precedent and being a model statewide, and the importance of us getting this challenge in Old Tampa Bay right. The ultimate findings of the management of the evaluation committee was that they did not recommend moving forward with funding the proposal that we did receive. Instead, they thought that it would be more effective and in the program's best interest if we revised the request for proposal language to more strongly emphasize those alternative drivers and that they expressed and that they identified throughout the evaluation committee meeting, and then re-advertise that revised request for proposals, hopefully in order to solicitate both more proposals, a more competitive process, and also ones that were more responsive to the actual challenges that we are observing on the ground in Old Tampa Bay. In talking with the evaluation committee as part of that discussion, like I said, they all agreed unanimously that the firm was highly qualified. And so with conditional acceptance, they were willing to understand understand why the program might want to accept the proposal that was provided. And if the management policy board do make that ultimate recommendation to move forward based on the proposal project team and the proposal that was received, they had several key suggestions for you all to consider. The first was that regardless of whether or not we go forward with this project team or a new RFP with a new project proposal team, they felt like the estuary program needed to invest in additional peer review to have subject matter experts be providing guidance at each step along the way of the process for developing any of the work products associated with a subsequent agreement. If we did enter into an agreement with Geosyntec, they had strong comments and suggestions in terms of changes that would need to be made to the scope of work that is negotiated to specifically address the deficiencies that I outlined in the beginning of the presentation and that are bulleted in this handout. I think those were the main points that they wanted me to convey. So their recommendation is that we don't move forward with the proposal that was received, that we revise the request for proposals, and that we re-advertise this project with a revised scope of work and include a robust peer review process as a part of that future work. But they did allow for this alternative action for you all to consider if you felt that was appropriate. And so I anticipate this will be some conversation from you all. And so I'd like to make the time for you to ask any questions and have discussion amongst yourself. Dave. Good.
So with the idea of maybe just negotiating with the one firm in terms of what's in the scope, would that present a problem with how the scope was advertised? In other words, is it
No, there's
a
no
radical change
there's no
that somebody else could say, hey, that's not what we saw?
There's nothing different than what was included in the request for proposals. It's a matter of emphasis. The proposal that we received focused very heavily on using the same modeling approaches and tools that we have seen our technical support contractor for the Nitrogen Management Consortium use and apply throughout decades of work, including the most recent reasonable assurance plan process. It's instead asking them to focus more on these alternative drivers of change and think a little bit outside of the box in terms of ways we can use those as a framework, as a decision-making framework and a management framework for understanding the things that aren't currently making sense in the Old Tampa Bay segment. So those issues were identified in the request for proposals that we issued as a program, but it perhaps didn't, it wasn't perceived as the main thrust of the work, at least in the proposal that we received back. So I don't think it would create a problem, no.
If you re-advertise the RFP, do you have ideas about how to solicit more responses to that? Around?
Yes, internally we've discussed hosting a meeting where potential respondents could learn more about the RFP, ask questions, and we could have like an engagement session where we could provide that additional guidance. We've also talked about further targeting. I mean, currently what we're doing is advertising multiple venues through email blasts, through social media, through our website. There's a whole list of things, but we could do some targeted promotion as well. So those,
perhaps if the board has the opportunity to help amplify that message, I don't know.
would happily accept any assistance to get the word out from you all in your networks.
Do you have any idea why? I mean, there's only one submittal.
No, I actually have that question as a sort of business process issue for us to work through, because this isn't the only time that we've put a request for proposals out there and we only get one proposal back. And so this is something that the program, I think, has dealt with for a number of years in a number of different fronts. I think the little bit of feedback that Ed and I have received on it was that the time window turnaround was a little bit too short for folks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, with discussions with some of the other management and policy board members, is we always try to squeeze as much juice out of the fruit as possible. So our bid levels are slightly lower than what the going rates are for some of this similar work that is happening statewide. So we may consider in this re-advertisement some additional funds earmarked for consortium work to target towards this renewed RFP and revised RFP. If we thought that that was going to make a difference in terms of the number of respondents that would reply. I'm not sure it would, because it's not a great increase in funds, but it's something we're going to consider.
And you also see how many of the firms that do this work working together to bring in one proposal for us. So, you know, it wasn't just Geosyntec, it was multiple firms who are active in this space. And that happens often, you know, you'll see dream teams, right?
Well, do you have a sense they'll rebid if you re-advertise?
Don't know.
That's the risk that we're sort of presenting to the board, and that's why we're giving the second option. If you all felt that that might be a risk of not receiving any proposals if we go out again.
Personally, I would love the opportunity for more than one bid. And that would be my preference. What's the length of time envisioned for this project? Like, is
This is a 1-year project.
It's fairly aggressive, and that's sort of the timelines we were putting out there to get the work done. But we've also heard from DEP review committee participants that they want this work done right. And so our internal timelines of getting this addendum and this work done was to provide a report to DEP by the end of next year, but they were willing to accept it after that period. So our aggressive timeline could be extended with this change or re-advertisement.
So the extra time that would be needed to re-advertise wouldn't pose a problem.
Hopefully not. Yeah, ideally we'd come back to the board in November with a recommendation based on more than one respondent, hopefully after re-advertisement. And that would still put us close to that 1-year timeline around the end of next year, but probably would extend into 2025 a little bit.
Can I ask about the second part of what sounds like paid peer review to me, which is kind of foreign? Is it more like a consultant role? And is this something they would just help evaluate the proposals, or would they follow project through and kind of make sure products were?
It would be a nominal stipend, which is something that's common in like the federal government for grant reviewers and things like that. But this would not just be for the proposal phase, this would be throughout the life of the project. And so that was a clear recommendation from the evaluation committee that the peer review process should be at multiple steps along the way as interim, draft, and final work products are being developed, and that there should be a clear workflow for their feedback to be incorporated into the final work product that's there.
More like an advisory committee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to add to that, it would be independent of the contract with the consultant. And the authorization we're seeking is up to my approval authority of up to $25,000 to solicit those subject matter experts to do that independent review.
So in total.
Yeah.
Any other discussion?
Question on that peer review process. So you would have a contract to work and ideally have a dream team doing that work, and then a separate entity, separate than the estuary program and the partners, another entity to review it. Is that feasible? Is there enough, to have a dream team and also have another entity outside of all of these other organizations?
With the amount of funding we have, we can make it work. It would not, change the re-advertisement up to that 50K level that we have available, but we could use some of that funding that we have earmarked for the consortium for this independent.
I think she's asking more from the expertise standpoint, and I feel strongly that there is additional expertise beyond, those folks that have already proposed or that may propose in the future. There's a lot of university expertise out there. There's historical expertise from folks who are doing consulting in this space. So I think we could put together a team of independent peer reviewers that's both knowledgeable of our existing paradigm and then also knowledgeable about sort of the cutting edge, what's going on, what's new. So I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah, just to add to that, this was based on reviewer recommendations of which the district was part of. So they're looking at a similar sort of process to what happens with the MFLs and an independent peer review panel solicited. And we actually had 2 subject matter experts when we were developing the old Tampa Bay integrated ecosystem model to basically review the products that were developed from that team as well. So it's a process we've employed in the past for some of our larger projects and important projects.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's exactly what I was thinking, is that it probably came out of the NFL model for their peer review. With that though, it isn't necessarily on the cutting edge, so to speak. There is kind of this, you follow certain criteria as you're reviewing it. So that's really my question is, if we're on the cutting edge of it, is there enough expertise in that space to hire somebody to do the work and then also a separate entity? And it sounds like there is.
How will they be identified or selected?
Through
Competitive solicitation.
Oh, for the reviewers?
Yeah, we asked for basically a request for qualifications for cost not to exceed a certain amount, outlining the work that we're talking about in terms of the review of the products developed under the contract.
Any additional discussion? Okay. So the recommended actions are that we recommend to the policy board to authorize the executive director to negotiate and, no.
That's the optional one, the actions.
Okay. That doesn't sound right. We recommend that they revise and re-advertise the request for proposals for the old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment Project. And Part B, we recommend to the policy board to direct staff to solicit additional subject matter expert peer reviewers for up to $25,000 to ensure that work products are responsive to identifying the corrective actions necessary to resolve the assimilative capacity of the old Tampa Bay segment and any subsequent proposal. Okay. Do I have a motion to accept these recommendations?
So moved.
I have a second. Any additional discussion?
Can I ask a clarification question? So the recommendation is to revise and re-advertise. So that means not entering into a negotiation with the current bidder. It's going to react. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, didn't hear any real support for that. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. All right. We are at the executive director and staff reports.
Yeah, on page 16 of the packet, we outlined a couple of items that I wanted to bring to your attention. First and foremost, I wanted to welcome Carly Jones to our program. She's started as the science communication coordinator back on July 31st, about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago now. She comes from us from the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute as their public information specialist, and we're really excited to have Carly on board to kind of help out with our communications moving forward. So I just wanted to welcome Carly.
You're really lucky to have Carly.
I think Fish and Wildlife started to notice that there's going on with the SG program. One thing I want to mention before I turn it over to staff is the Army Corps of Engineers has actually proposed a new evaluation for the Tampa Harbor dredging. Basically, the federally maintained shipping channels all the way up to Port Tampa Bay. There's several beneficial use projects that have been identified in that draft report. I know they will be presenting this at the ABM Natural Resource Review Committee next Wednesday. So I encourage all of our management boards to participate at that meeting because there are some out of the box concepts in terms of beneficial use for some of that dredge disposal that would be generated from maintaining the channels. So I bring that to the board's attention because they're asking for comments by September 11th on that draft report. Other than that, I wanted to turn over to staff. First, I wanted to give Jessica the opportunity to highlight our Bay Mini grants that are currently open.
Good morning. So the Bay Mini grant applications are currently open. If you're not familiar, those are grants up to $5,000 that we provide to organizations within the community to do restoration or environmental education of some sort. We would love your assistance in getting the word out. So if there are newsletters that your department puts out or anything like that, or a way to put it on your website, that would be great. The application period closes on September 15th. If people are interested and aren't sure like where to start or what to do, they can contact me or Sheila. We're both working on this together. So we would love your help to get this in front of more people.
Jessica, I touch on our new temperature monitoring that we're doing in Old Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
First. Jessica, can you just touch on what type of projects come in for the Bay Mini grants?
Yeah, so some restoration projects in the past have been rain garden installations, removing invasive plants and planting native plants, for example, or they've been some kind of educational toolkit for a class, for example, or summer camp, something like that. But we're open to unique ideas too. We'd love to see some really cool stuff come in. There is a focus this year selected by the community or CAC, I'm not sure the best way to frame that, but
Crowdsourced it on social media.
On mangrove habitats, so planting, maintenance, and education related to mangroves are a priority this year, but everything within the CCMP is welcome as well.
Any other questions on Bay Mini grants? Next item, kind of give a highlight on is the temperature monitoring we're conducting up in Old Tampa Bay. You want to give a brief overview?
You might have seen a couple of teaser news stories last year about this project. And then the sea surface temperatures have obviously been a very hot topic in the news this summer. And so we are doing some timely work to evaluate how temperature trends might be influencing seagrass meadows in Old Tampa Bay. So we're going out there every 2 weeks and deploying temperature loggers at 6 sites, 3 that have seagrass and 3 that don't have seagrass, but all in areas that are shallow enough to support potentially seagrass habitats. And basically recording those temperatures over about a 4 to 5 day period. Then we go back out, we retrieve the loggers, we download the data, and we do it all again, rinse, lather, repeat, every 2 weeks through September. So as a part of that research that's ongoing, and in conjunction with our open science philosophy, you can see the results coming in. On that bi-weekly basis, there's open tools and an app where you can see that through our GitHub. So you can kind of see the kinds of temperatures that we're observing at the different locations when we're deploying out over time. And then as part of this sort of overall, we're also looking at some of the long-term data sets that you all contribute to collecting, whether it's the EPC through the long-term monitoring, FIM, or some of the county's programs where we're going in and looking at those long-term trends over the period of record that we have in those data sets that are available. And then we're also using some of the satellite-based tools that NOAA puts together to look at sea surface temperatures so that we can sort of get an idea about what those kinds of trends we're observing throughout Tampa Bay are more broadly. Just anecdotally from being out on the water so much this summer, I'll tell you Old Tampa Bay is probably having a good year. The water clarity has been pretty excellent. Up until the past week or so, we hadn't really seen pyridinium at bloom concentrations pretty much anywhere. So we were getting just lots of really clear water, good conditions. Unfortunately, that changed between when I wrote this and now. We are seeing some pyridinium, but not at the kinds of levels that we saw in those years where we did exceed the chlorophyll A target. So just anecdotal observations, what we're seeing out there and that we're doing this work. We'll be hosting a media day and trying to get the word out about this research that the program's doing. And if you have access to any data sets that we might not be aware of or thinking about, temperature in seagrass, please send it along to Sheila or Marcus.
What is that? I should know, but I don't. Like, what in the literature, what are the effects of increased temperature on seagrass? Is it generally detrimental, beneficial? Do you see stress?
Yeah, it really depends on the type of seagrass. And that's something that Marcus and I are looking more into is the thermal maximums of seagrass. Because there's been proposed some general maximums, especially for Thalassia and Syringodium, but Aliduli seems to be more resistant to some of the higher temperatures. But so more of that information, we'll be pulling more of that information from the literature. So
The question becomes, is that these stresses basically will shift the species composition towards that pioneering species that's most tolerant to higher temperatures in the region. And that remains to be seen, but we're asked staff to tease out that information.
Yeah,
And hopefully publish it on it.
We're looking at some of these longer sets to get a better sense of what are these long-term changes that might be contributing to some of the seagrass alterations and losses we've seen. So the work that's being done this summer is, on top of that, of this higher resolution data set that we think we can get a better sense of understanding temperature at this really fine time scale. Salinity is the other one that we're looking at. We know we've seen sort of these long-term reductions in salinity, so there could be interacting effects of changes in salinity and temperature that we're trying to look at too, because there's these optimal ranges for different seagrass species that window of salinity and temperature could be shifting. So we're trying to tease that apart. End of the year we might have a study. So look forward to that. One caveat about that plot, that top line where you see the 38-degree max, that's the thermal outfall from Bartow. So
You'll be the island power plant.
yeah. So that's an outlier. But overall, it's still very hot this year. And it's
warm temperatures.
Do you know if anything similar is being done in Florida Bay? I mean, they're hitting some.
they're talking about it everywhere.
In
terms of the actual research going on right now, I'm not sure, but I've been reaching out to other folks. Yeah.
Brad Furman was doing some work and deploying a bunch of sensors in like Rankin and some of those other more sensitive bays that have experienced like significant seagrass loss recurring. So I can check back with him and see if he's doing anything. I'm not sure if he's doing, like if he has deployments out right now, but he has done some of that work in the past.
It would be interesting to compare systems.
And this is just Old Tampa Bay that this study is happening in, and it's not continuous sensors. Like they're just out there, for 4 to 5 days. And these are things that like we're getting a lot of data requests and media requests that people want to know, like what's out there collecting all the time, bay-wide, everywhere. I think I saw Mike's weather page is like out there with a pool thermometer and measuring those. It's got attention.
And the exact locations that we're deploying are randomized every time we go out. So we're not going to the exact same spot every time.
So we use your seagrass maps to.
Yeah.
And these are the exact external drivers that we need to consider, especially since we've lost seagrass, that the seagrass now have to overcome to regain a foothold in some of these areas. So it's one thing to consider thermal max and tolerance of a healthy seagrass bed, but it's another to actually regain the seagrasses that we lost in Old Tampa Bay. So again, this is something we want factored into that summative capacity work that we talked about earlier as well. Any other questions on temperature monitoring? Sheila did have a couple updates on some volunteer events coming up, as well as National Estuary Week in September.
Yeah, so we have some really awesome, exciting events coming up later this summer and early fall. One of those is we're actually partnering with Tampa Bay Watch to expand the Great Bay Scallop Search. So this is a citizen science or participatory science initiative to help us get an idea or assess the scallop population in Tampa Bay. Historically, the scallop search had only really gone to like the southern part of Coquina Flat, but anecdotally, we know, like we've observed scallops farther north. So we're working with Tampa Bay Watch to set up a second location to extend the scallop search all the way up to Whedon. So we're hoping that this gives us a better assessment of the actual scallop population in Tampa Bay. So that is taking place on August 19th, so a week from tomorrow. There are a few spots available still at the Grandview location. So please.
If you have a boat only.
If you have a boat and you want to get out and swim through some beautiful seagrass flats, reach out to me or sign up online. The other thing I wanted to mention is National Estuaries Week is September 16th through the 23rd. So this is a week-long celebration where we basically get to celebrate all of our estuaries and the many benefits that they provide. So we have a few events that we're hosting, mainly to get people out and actually celebrating the estuary. So on September 16th, we have an info paddle on Boca Ciega Bay. So we'll be providing kayaks for those of you who don't have them, but you're also welcome to bring your own kayaks. We'll just be going out, paddling, looking around at Tampa Bay and how beautiful it is. So the last time we did one of these paddles, it sold out in less than an hour. So if you're interested, be sure to sign up quickly before we blast that in early September. The other event that's happening that week is Brews in the Bay. It's a game night. We're partnering with Sarasota Bay Estuary Program to have kind of just a hangout game night sesh at Three Keys Brewing just off the Manatee River. So come out, come hang out with us, and let's play some games. And then the last event that I'm really excited about is the Tampa Bay Debris Derby. So this is a trash collection tournament that we are hosting with the Power Pole Shallow Water Anchor, Skinny Water Culture, and Tampa Bay Waterkeeper. So like I said, it's a trash collection tournament. We're expecting about 250 people to attend. We're gonna have some really awesome prizes that you can win, the more trash you clean. So we've got Power Poles donating a Power Pole that you can win. Costa's already donated some sunglass packages. The Rays are going to be donating some tickets for Rays games. So should be really awesome, really great prizes. So be sure to be there. And that is November 4th at A.G. Simmons. And that's all I have.
Questions for Sheila on those events?
What was the date for Brews on the Bay?
Brews on the Bay is September 20th at Three Keys Brewing.
Three Keys.
Three Keys, yeah, it's just on over 41.
And then for the debris derby, do you need a boat to have that? So if we were looking to participate, we would have to find a boat. Just trying to understand like.
Yeah, it'll primarily be boaters, like it's primarily water-based. We will offer an opportunity for shoreside. You did want to bring a boat. You could also bring a kayak or paddleboard and participate on the water like that.
I think last year some remnant engines came in and some anchors. So I'd recommend a boat if you want to be competitive with the companies.
Thank you.
Nobody needed to go to the gym that day.
Yeah, actually Ed. It was a champ.
Last staff update is related to the new economic valuation that the Regional Planning Council just finalized and the dashboard that the program staff helped develop. So Blake, you want to highlight?
Yeah, so for those of you who were at the management board meeting at the beginning of this year, hopefully you'll remember that Alana Todd and Harry Walsh from the Regional Planning Council gave a presentation about the results of their study funded by the Tampa Bay Estuary Environmental Restoration Fund. And so that report is now officially out. You can get copies of the report back on the table if you want. But also, if you don't like to read, because who does like to read, we do have on our website now a data dashboard. And so if you want to go to the dashboard, you can explore the data from the study yourself. And so if you want to look at different contributions, here you go. So you can see, different economic contributions of the Bay to different sectors, and you can say what type of contribution you want, direct, indirect, and whether you want to look at jobs or income that's been contributed to those different sectors. You can do that. There's another section that's all about the added property value benefits provided from flood protection. And so you can see, the area that they look at for these properties that are next to the shoreline. And so get that added home value by the Bay. And you can see the results here that break it down in terms of different models that they use with different data and how those benefits flow to the homes in those areas. And then the last result section is all about ecosystem services provided by the different habitats in the Bay. And so you can look at carbon sequestration benefits, denitrification benefits, as well as flood protection benefits from wetlands and mangroves across the watershed. Additionally, we have some short snippets, summaries of the methods for each of those. People will need to download the full document if they want to get all the nitty-gritty details. But also in that methods section, there's a spot for people to download the data. So all of this information will be readily available to anybody who'd like to access it and incorporate it into their own work. So you should all have a link to that in the board packet. It's also available if you go to the homepage of TBEP and click on Data Visualization Tools. You'll be able to see it available there. Yeah, Ilana is also here. If you have any burning questions or want to bother her after this, feel free. Yeah.
Thanks, Blake. Any questions?
So the next item is the tax committee report.
Yeah, I could give that since Kelly and Dr. Moyer are able to attend today. So at your places on page 17 kind of outlines over the past quarter some of the activities of staff and our committees as organized by our staff. So we had 4 technical reports and 4 peer-reviewed publications that were put out in the primary literature over this past quarter. Blake talked about that economic valuation dashboard, but Marcus has also been working on a fecal indicator bacteria dashboard as well, summarizing some of the bacteriological monitoring that's going on in the Bay, as well as the temperature dashboard that we just mentioned. Staff's been active presenting at different forums. They're all listed on page 17 there. And then also the field work that was just mentioned to assess some of the seagrass conditions in the Bay. That continues to be an annual event that we coordinate amongst different partners. And that training event that happened over this past period, and now partners are actively monitoring about 60 or so transects in Tampa Bay to get an idea of the conditions there. And we'll assimilate that information and update our dashboards accordingly once we receive the data. 3 committee meetings to highlight. The Open Science Subcommittee met back in May. Our Nitrogen Management Consortium and Technical Advisory Committee met to discuss basically the RFP that we just let in this past quarter. And then also the Southwest Florida Regional Ambient Monitoring Program meeting was held July 12th. And I believe that was their 100th round robin event.
It's our 101, but it was like our 100th round robin celebration event. So
Highlight some of the Technical Advisory Committee work as well as staff activities over the past quarter.
Questions, Fred? Thank you. The next item, it says 10:30 or later, and it is later. So
There's actually the Community Advisory Committee.
oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Community Advisory Committee report.
The Community Advisory Committee met on July 26th, and we had a presentation from many grants, including Fish Luncheon, And from Beth Voorhees on cameras, which were monitoring wildlife in Fort DeSoto Park at night, which was very interesting. She has a website where you can look at that footage, which is pretty cool. And also heard about the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's equity strategy. And then we had other updates, including upcoming opportunities for volunteers, some of the ones that Sheila just talked about. And members were encouraged to, promote those within our networks. We're looking forward to the Bay Mini Grants applications coming in, and we're having a committee to evaluate those. And we also talked about how the committee members could better maybe assist some of the mini grant applicants or recipients in order to make their projects better and to, facilitate their timely completion and success. And I think that's about it. I think that's it.
Questions for Jan? You. Okay, moving on to discussion items. The next item is the regional artificial turf recommendations. Maxwell Piles.
It's Max online.
Maxwell is online. I've just made him presenter.
This was in response to a policy board request to continue the discussion on some of the artificial turf issues that have been faced by some of the municipalities in the region. MaxPile has been working with the Regional Planning Council on identifying policies related to artificial turf, as well as some of the science that has been developed by IFAS researchers. And he's presented this overview at the agency and Bay Management in the past. And in response to our policy board request to have this discussion, we're having Max present the same information here today. We're happy to kind of see where the discussion leads in terms of developing regional recommendations for our artificial turf, but we want to provide this background to start the conversation off. So with that, Max, thank you for attending, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm having some technical difficulties for a second, so I apologize about that. Can you guys see my screen and hear me all right?
Yes.
We can hear you. What we see for your screen is not presentation mode, and now we're seeing your email.
Right. I apologize. For some reason on my screen, it keeps going black.
Perfect. We've got it now. Oh. We have it.
You can see it all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so as you were saying, my name is Max Piles. I'm a student from Stetson University. Myself and another student, Angela Shu, who unfortunately couldn't be here for this presentation, we are part of EGO's Public Interest Law Clinic for Democracy and the Environment. And we were approached by the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, specifically DBM, to give a little conversation about artificial turf. So in case you're not aware, which I'm sure you are, artificial turf is a surface of synthetic fibers made to look like natural grass. Historically, it has been used in sports fields, so like you probably heard of AstroTurf. The name comes from the Houston Astros because they're one of the first teams to use artificial turf. But in recent years, it's started to be more in residential uses, and it's kind of garnered some concern among local governments, which is why we were asked to do this research. So a little bit about what we did for this presentation. We primarily did some scholarly research into the environmental impacts of artificial turf, but we also did some legal research into the how municipalities throughout Florida have regulated artificial turf in recent years, just to see kind of what kind of issues they wanted to address and how they were doing that. We also met with Dr. Cruz, who's a turf grass scientist at the University of Florida, to talk a little bit about what he knows of artificial turf, as well as members of the Tampa Bay Builders Association, which includes some people who run businesses that install turf in the local area. So as far as environmental impacts go, one of the major issues we saw was with water conservation. Primarily, a lot of people think these layers on top here are the most impactful on water infiltration, but in our research and what we talked about with Dr. Cruz, the biggest issue is actually this natural subgrade at the very bottom here. During the installation process, it gets very heavily compacted, and instead of the water running through down into the groundwater like it normally would, once it goes through the turf itself and hits that subgrade, it then diverts and becomes runoff. And overall, studies have shown that artificial turf displays significantly greater volume and portion of runoff than living grass. One of the other issues we've seen has been with heat and heat retention specifically. You've probably heard of the urban heat island effect before, where certain artificial materials will hold on to heat throughout the day and even into the evening and release that heat in ways natural surfaces do not. And artificial turf, because of the materials that it uses, has the same issue. There are some studies that have looked at this and shown that artificial turf can have as much as 86 degrees higher, degrees Fahrenheit higher than natural surfaces, and 8 degrees hotter than asphalt even. There's also some ecological concerns involved with artificial turf. Simply you're taking out a natural grass ecosystem and replacing it with a synthetic one is never really that great for the local ecology. But as well, it's getting rid of good insects and other good plants, but it also can still support weed growth, so it doesn't always have the best effect. Likewise, microorganisms that usually live on natural turf start to usually decompose waste products, for example, like animal fecal matter. But without these microorganisms living on the natural turf, it will then enter the runoff without having to decompose. Lastly, pollution is an issue we've seen greatly. A lot of these artificial turf, they contain microplastics, specifically PFAS, per polymer substances. A study in Scandinavia saw that there was hundreds of metric tons of microplastics being leached from the artificial turf into the water bodies. And they also contain volatile organic chemicals, which can also leach with microplastics. And some of these are known carcinogens, and they leach into the stormwater runoff and enter local water bodies. For this reason, numerous places have completely banned artificial turf for this exact reason, including in New England, cities in California, and the same European countries I talked about before. And as of right now, artificial turf is possibly recyclable, but it's still very much up in the air. It's not very widely used. There's only a couple countries that are capable, or a couple companies that are capable of recycling, and they're not very widely adopted. So as far as existing regulations, we looked in the Tampa Bay area, because for obvious reasons, we're just for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, but we also looked at Orlando and a handful of other small municipalities in South Florida. In the Tampa Bay area, as far as we looked at their ordinances primarily, so Hernando County says that artificial turf is not a live plant installation, and then St. Pete Beach says that it is a non-vegetative pervious material, but it does limit it to 20% of the minimum required pervious area. And then we also saw that there is some more indirect regulation, or at the very least, it's not codified in the local ordinances. For example, stormwater guidelines often address artificial turf in some way. Tampa and St. Petersburg do as well in their stormwater guidelines. Almost every single municipality has an impervious surface ratio that they use on properties. So I'm sure you're aware, but just as a refresher, this is the amount of impervious surface you're allowed to have on a piece of residential property. And so what many cities will do is they will say that it is impervious, and they will include it in the impervious surface ratio. And there's also vegetative material requirements that work much the same way, and where it's counted as non-vegetative. and is only allowed up to a certain amount. So outside of the Tampa Bay area, we saw a list of other common standards, including permitting standards, design standards, installation standards, how much is allowed on a piece of property, and then some additional standards that are just random bits and bobs I'll get into in a minute. So as far as permitting standards go, this is something we saw in every single municipality outside of the Tampa Bay area that tried to address artificial turf. They required a permit. And in these permitting standards, they required a whole host of information sent to the city, including landscaping plans, irrigation plans. They needed to inform the city about the manufacturer specifications of the turf that's being used, pretty much anything that could help them have a good idea of what is being put into the local area. They also required design standards. So some of this is more aesthetic based, make it look good, minimum, maximum blade height, but they also often regulate what material is allowed to be used in the grass blades. So they'll often say polypropylene or polyethylene specifically. They also often regulate the infill use. You've probably heard of the crumb rubber infill, which is the little tiny black dots. Usually they look like bits of tires or something like that. And this is one of the major sources of microplastics and pollution. So a lot of these regulations specifically say that can't be used in a residential area. Instead, they need to use silica sand, for example. And this is something that's not very controversial, mostly because in residential uses, silica sand is more common than the crumb rubber infill. These regulations go ahead and codify that anyway. They also have some regulations such as a permeable backing, trying to raise how much water infiltration there is. Basically, they want the wind to come in and rip it up. And lead-free, flame retardant, pretty self-explanatory. Prohibit indoor-outdoor carpeting. They don't want people building any golf courses in their yards, essentially. They often also include installation standards, so they require it to be done by a licensed contractor. They need the contractor specifications using the right material. A couple also say that the subgrade needs to have positive drainage, so that's that very bottom layer I was talking about before, which often can't really have positive drainage. So we kind of had a question whether or not these regulations were actually effective, but nonetheless, they were still present. And same seems in infill, is mostly aesthetic, make sure it's good and stays in place. Others also have maintaining distance from plant structures, lines. For example, Orlando requires a 50-foot distance between the edge of the turf and the water body. And as well, also just make sure the protection of roots for trees and other vegetation is maintained during the installation process. So one of the other major aspects of these regulations is just how much is allowed to be input on a piece of property. The most common way that we saw this regulated was the impervious surface ratio, as I talked about before. This seems to be the most common just because it's very natural and makes sense. It has it's an existing standard within all these municipalities. The artificial turf can very easily slot it into. Another way directly reduce how much turf can be on property that I was also talking about before, the 50 feet from water bodies, 6 feet from trees, these kind of things that'll overall reduce the amount of turf on a piece of property. And as always, we can set a hard limit. So Miami Shores, one of the municipalities we look at, for example, set it at 30% of the area or 600 feet. This is not something we saw very commonly used, probably because it's very arbitrary in nature. You can't really say why would they set it at 600 feet, for example. So going with something like a surface ratio, which just kind of makes a lot more sense. And lastly, some additional standards, just maintenance standards, make sure it looks good, stays that way. Prohibition of rights of way, and prohibition restricting the use in the front yard, allow it only in the rear yard, make sure any kind of damage from the utility company is covered by the property owner and not the company, and prohibition on sidewalk. We also wanted to note that Florida Friendly Landscaping is a program here in Florida that's often used in municipalities. St. Petersburg and Orlando use this to not directly influence, but it's something that they keep in mind when making these kinds of decisions. And Florida Friendly Landscaping does not consider artificial turf to be a Florida friendly product. So finally, some of the takeaways we took from our research: we didn't find hard limits to be very common, as I said before, because they tend to seem arbitrary in comparison to other limits. Permitting processes, on the other hand, were almost ubiquitous because it lets the municipality get ahead of the game, essentially let them know what's being input on these properties and how they're being input. A lot of these regulations also try to reduce some of the environmental aspects. So you think how much is allowed on a piece of property, requiring that it maintain the natural landscape, protect the trees, protect the water bodies, and kinds of things. And then just what materials are allowed to be used, such as the regulation of crumb rubber infill use. And then last but not least, just general installation requirements. Make sure if it's going to be done, make sure it's done the right way. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say today, and I appreciate you hearing me out. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say. I appreciate
Thanks, Max. Does anybody have any questions for Maxwell?
This sounded like it was a request from the policy, so this will sit them or what?
This will be presented to them again. You know, this is a discussion item. I know a lot of the municipalities are considering different ordinances in response to artificial turf regulations. So if there's a desire for uniformity among those municipal rules, that sort of recommendation or discussion on the from the management board on sort of that recommendation is what this is trying to engender.
Want to throw it out there as well. There's a back end cost to this in perspective. Ultimately, once we go down that road of impervious and pervious on artificial turf, that starts to take into consideration the stormwater rate calculations as well. And there's no real guarantee on the how these are installed, how they're maintained. So is that a one-time credit, or is it a continuous credit? How is the compliance and monitoring done on that on the back end? I think that also has to be a topic of discussion. The other elements that we've seen, and I had the opportunity to take a look at the city of Tampa when they were doing that test, and you know, what we noted on site, the one that was tested is what we installed those types in the city limits. We use a forever lawn as an example, but that has a service life for us. We replace that very often, and you know, the construction that we typically put in on that on forever lawn is not typically what's done on the residential. It's washed, aggregated, well graded. The gradation that I saw in the TRO report resulted in quite a bit of fines that could result in clogging and also use of crushed concrete. So that, as an example, we require a 12-inch nail board embedded into the base material, actually the filtration material. So that way the grass, the artificial turf itself does not pull up. We've seen installations that are just done with nails, meaning the stakes that are driven on the edges right around. So again, what is being installed on the residential side, does that meet what is done on the commercial or the sports complex installations, which is a much different category. So I think those two elements do need to be definitely factored into the discussion because it does affect yes, the water quality, it doesn't have residual effects on compliance, the rates and the impacts to residents. And how do we monitor this? Is that a whole new monitoring program that we have to build out as well?
Yeah, it's at City of Tampa, it's kind of been a hot topic for us for a long time. We've always kind of permitted and allowed turf to be used as 70% impervious, but we were always concerned with what they were putting in that subgrade. It was usually like crushed and compacted concrete, limestone, and we always felt that over time that weathers and it becomes concrete basically, so nothing can really perk through it. So as you were saying, we did commission a study with a geotechnical engineer to kind of really figure out what's going on and study different types of subsurface. And we've had a lot of coordination with the Tampa Bay Builders Association because it's really, like I said, a hot topic, and we're trying to find like a balance of what really makes sense from a runoff and water quality standpoint. For residential lots, City of Tampa requires if you're over 50% impervious, you have to provide half-inch retention for water quality purposes. But we think when sometimes you put that turf down and you have those unchecked layers underneath and that visqueen that really prohibits watery flow, eventually it's going to generate more runoff over time. And so we don't think that's a great thing. But we have come up with a draft policy that we're trying to push forward. The Builders Association is in agreement with it. It basically states that if you want to consider turf fully impervious, you can't have any confining like visqueen layers underneath. You have to provide at least 4-inch deep reservoir of clean FDOT aggregate rock. And we also agree that it's going to be hard to police that and inspect that. We're thinking that, a contractor has to present like a ticket from their rock yard that they got the right washed rock and stuff, because if you have fines and other small materials in there, it's going to clog up over time. So we're trying to figure that all out, but also, like I said, find that balance. So it's an interesting topic, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about it.
Just based off of what you were saying, aggregate, one of the things we thought when talking to Dr. Juicen and whatnot, and in our studies, is just even if that aggregate is permeable, the layer of dirt underneath is compacted so much that it also provides another barrier. So even if you have all of those right materials being used,
so part of our new policy, we did put in there that if you want to consider that you're pervious, 100% pervious, you cannot compact the subgrade at all. We think that is also critical. No soil or subgrade compaction whatsoever. And then if you do, we also have like a semi-pervious, like 70%, where if you start to have less than a 4-inch reservoir of rock underneath or other materials, we'll consider it semi-pervious. And then if you have any visqueen or rock or anything like that that doesn't meet the standards with fines, then it's fully impervious. So we give different levels of choices.
But then also with that thought, if you have a well-graded aggregate that allows percolation, if you don't have a filtration fabric between the uncompacted base, then you result in upward migration and siltation. So you're still going to require some sort of filtration barrier.
True. Yes. Yeah, it's something else to consider for sure. Yeah.
What's the action?
This is just a discussion. It's if there's a specific recommendation, we'll bring this sort of conversation to the policy board. Considerations of the submaterial, the service life issues that you brought up, some of the draft policies and differences among municipalities, and see if there's any direction from the policy board at that point, unless there's a specific recommendation that the management board wants to make at this time.
I mean, it's really design standards. I'm curious, is it just an update to the policy board, or is a separate committee or is there a separate jurisdiction that actually is going to develop the standards, the criteria? How does that work? Just trying to figure out how that relationship is. I don't really see it, but I see it.
Yeah, that hasn't been our bailiwick before, but we're happy to, convene and kind of, if there's some desire for uniformity in the region, working with the Regional Planning Council, I think is most appropriate to kind of come up with draft guidelines that could be used for, basis of review for some of these applications, if so desired.
Well, has the FSA been engaged in this discussion? Florida Stormwater Association, is for them taking a look at developing the criteria, because again, I look at this as design standards as opposed to policy. Just discussion, right? That would be my thing. I don't think it should be coming out to the estuary board. I think it should be an industry standard that relates across.
We would also need to include like the Florida Native Society, the Florida Friendly has been a campaign out there, and this, I'm not sure how it competes with that messaging as well too. So the Stormwater Association should have a voice, but so should, the ecological component of it as well. So I think then it's probably somebody outside of those entities that would have to facilitate. Maybe it's not the estuary program, but like the Regional Planning Council or some other entity to facilitate some of those discussions.
I mean, that would be my comment to the policy board. I think the policy is different as opposed to standards.
Does, I don't know if Max is still there. Are there broader scale efforts to develop such standards? I mean, in his investigation, it's like statewide type of assessment underway, or
Not from what I have seen. From what I saw in research, it mostly was just individual municipalities here and there. I didn't talk about this in the presentation, but a lot of the regulations within like South Florida are very like carbon copy of each other. So I assume there's some kind of communication going on there, but as to what that is, I'm not sure.
the appropriate scale that such a undertaking should be on?
Do we know how the turf is viewed just from an environmental resource permitting standpoint? If it's, in terms of impervious versus pervious?
But I think the city is drafting a new policy for consideration, basically, sound like on the application and how they might prepare the site. There's certain thresholds that could be met to meet the impervious threshold. It sounds like in the city versus imperviousness. Otherwise, the prep is considered impervious for most other municipalities.
Is the city of Tampa's stormwater fee based on the percent perviousness?
It is, yep.
Okay, so Pinellas is too, I know.
So CP.
I wonder if they're doing similar work.
Yeah, I think honestly, everybody's kind of looking towards us for the input because we're just coming up with this policy right now. It seems like with all the battles we've been fighting with the private community and TBVA, it's just kind of been launched at us to come up with something. So we came up with this draft policy, but I think there should be regional consensus. I think everybody needs to kind of buy in. It's going to affect a lot of people and agencies and industries. So however we make that happen, I don't know.
Have the building community along as a willing partner, I think.
Yeah, it's that balance.
Go along with.
It's been that careful balance. So, because we believe turf, it's not done right, it's going to contribute to more runoff, adverse water quality impacts. So, yeah, I think there's
Thinking on, stormwater treatment quality quantity side, if our filter is not flat as a water quality and quantity treatment, for permitting purposes, how can we even consider it for giving that as a stormwater credit? Look inside. just take that into consideration as you draft that policy. Because if it's, yeah.
I also know that there have been NFL stadiums throughout the country that have, I'm sure they get state of the art. I think it's primarily designed to protect the players, but you've got to think there's got to be a concern, certainly in this region, in rainy season, early on in the football season, to make the field playable and not dangerous. And I watch enough football to probably know more about football than I do artificial turf. I could tell you, a long time ago, we probably tell it for New England, but the Patriots field, I remember specifically being at a U2 concert, and the field was like a rock. No wonder why players were getting hurt. It was hard enough to walk on to stand during a concert, but the evolution of technology has come a long way. And it seems to me, from what I watch on TV anyway, that the NFL certainly has the resources to invest into player safety and to improve means of artificial turf. Just an option, and I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard that, but I know that there's got to be a means by which drainage can work so that the game can be played. And maybe there's a little piece of that that can be environmentally friendly as well as an option.
You know, Sean, you bring up a good point there, because essentially what we've seen on the ones, going back to the cost, are the ones that we would typically install that can possibly be considered impervious. Is that really what is within the cost brackets for residents?
Right, yeah, because if you start adding in all this crazy drainage and piping, and the NFL fields have that rubber component where when you hit it, it bounces up and stuff. I don't think residential use is quite appropriate for that. It gets really expensive, and that's what people are pushing back on if we make them do. So
it's that balance like we talked about.
Careful balance, yeah.
But I think what I'm getting from this, just to kind of move the discussion along a little bit, is that there's some desire for regional consensus among some of the policies that are and standards that are being considered by the municipal governments at this time. Specifically, the calculation of stormwater credits and imperviousness. There's some standards and uniformity among the region that could be helpful to both industry practitioners as well as residential residents within the region. So having that discussion would be a benefit. And then lastly, some of the service life considerations that you mentioned that, that has to be factored in terms of residential applications where there is a defined service life of this product, and how that's factored into compliance and monitoring needs to be considered as well. Does that touch on the highlights that was discussed? Definitely bring those points to the policy board discussion and see what action they want to take at that point.
So Ed, if you don't mind, also as part of that discussion, what we've seen in our research, because we've installed a few on city facilities, is that, and I subscribe to the term context appropriate. So the actual turf itself there's differences. Some of these are knitted base, like a rug, and the artificial grass actually is netted in, as opposed to some of these are almost like a neoprene mat with holes. So they're completely different wide spectrums of the type of artificial turf that you're going to even get.
Well,
You're done with this discussion item? All right, the next item is discussion on the effects of section 403.06417 for statute on Tampa Bay. And that is more from Ben Alishewski.
Yep, Alishewski. Yeah, hopefully everybody's attention spans are still intact, but yeah, the city just thought it might be prudent to discuss this topic. It was brought up earlier a couple times already. But the reality of the Bill 64 is that obviously by 2032 to eliminate all surface water discharges, and the city obviously has the Howard M. Kern wastewater treatment plant discharges to the bay right now that was discussed earlier. It is in compliance, but we are looking for kind of wanted to bring it to this board just as industry experts and just talk and see what others are doing about this. And we think that for this reclaimed water, that there is a higher and better use. We don't necessarily believe that there's an ecological benefit to continuing to discharge the way we are right now. We'd like to continue to believe that we're going to continue reducing nutrients in the bay and continue to improve the water quality in the bay. So we just kind of wanted to opine on this with this group and see what you all thought about that. If continuing to discharge at the current rates is okay. If we have the policy board strike up a similar discussion after this or something like that. It's kind of a hot topic, but just hoping the estuary program can weigh in. I also have our sustainability and resiliency coordinator, Whit Reamer, here to discuss more. Any questions arise? So, thoughts?
I could chime in.
Yeah, no, please, want to say that.
So I appreciated Sid's presentation and understand a lot of the constraints that some of our municipalities are experiencing, particularly as it relates to implementing Senate Bill 64. I think that the one consideration that, has to be balanced, we are meeting certain allocations on a baywide level, but we know that municipalities individually are potentially seeing additional wastewater and limits to their treatment capacity. And from that standpoint, the estuary program has always been supportive of identifying reclaim projects that would reduce the amount of nutrient loads going into Tampa Bay. We've been supportive of those projects. They're defined, referenced in our comprehensive management plan. And I think moving forward, the estuary program is going to be supportive of what actions the city wants to take. Our earn, especially with the constraints and application that that facility currently has now. So from that standpoint, let's take that and reaffirm that through the policy board. I think we'd be happy to have that discussion and recommendation. The policy board next week, but that's been the standpoint of the estuary program. That's what we've presented on in terms of moving the region in a direction to think comprehensively. So we don't take it lightly. It's something that we need to think about the investments and the timelines you heard that need to be taken into consideration to meet not only individual permitted obligations, but our regional capacity to assimilate wastewater in our watershed has to be taken into consideration. So from that standpoint, that's why my projection of the estuary program policy, as well as some of my opinion on the subject, but we'd be happy to have that discussion with the policy board as well. And that isn't meant to quell any other discussion that any of the management board members or if we want to have additional public comment from Sid, we can entertain that as well.
I do think that there's probably a lot of entities at the estuary program that are sitting at this table today, probably with the same issue. So it's probably very specific. There's like the entities that have already dealt with it in the past, looking for projects. And I'm speaking, of course, on behalf of the Water Management District. So we don't own any infrastructure. We aren't dealing with this issue specifically. And then to reiterate a little bit of what Ed was speaking to, we are supportive also of finding a different use for that. There's the MFL reeval going on at the moment. And so through that, some of that work, we do see benefit for it going somewhere else. And so we are supportive of that effort as well. So I don't have a whole lot to add to it, but I wanted to mention it. I appreciate
that. Yeah, just two quick comments. Quantities matter. And so we can debate the ecological role of estuaries are where freshwater and marine waters mix. There's volumes of literature about the beneficial effects of freshwater inflow, particularly in fisheries production. So when we think about Tampa Bay, we have to think more than just seagrass, but the various functions. So the issue we're dealing with the city of Tampa is what to do with 50 MGD in 8.5 years. So what I propose is you can look at balances and look at various quantities of reclaimed water. Quantities matter. So I think that's the issue we're dealing with here. And look at the complete function of freshwater inflow to estuaries, including fisheries production. So I think there's room to look at this incrementally over time and look at the various quantities and the beneficial reuse of reclaimed water. Can you put it somewhere that's cost effective and safe and you know, that sort of thing. So there's definitely a good balance there. But right now, the city of Tampa is working on a very difficult constraint under Senate Bill 64.
I don't think our statements are disagreeing with what you just said. We recognize sort of the constraints that the city is operating under. Any additional reductions of that water from a nutrient loading standpoint, we see as a benefit, but it does not necessarily need to be the full 50 MUD.
I just went with the city of Tampa, maybe as an alternate or a backup to Ben, but I think one of the questions that the city is interested in is Mr. Flannery is presenting a technical paper on behalf of himself as a retired scientist, and we don't have any evidence showing that there are ecological benefits of the current discharge, and that's the presumption from which Mr. Flannery is presenting from. So the idea of the estuary program is there a secondary study or a peer review that should be done of the paper, because the paper is having an outsized influence on the decisions being made of our city on behalf of our city council. And I think the idea is to have more voices and have that position either verified or challenged by other scientific bodies. And I respect Mr. Flannery's 30 years of service with SwiftMud, but I'm not sure that the conclusions that he's reached in that paper are shared by SwiftMud or any other scientific body in the region. In fact, I think they're probably contrary to that. And that's not the message that our city council, unfortunately, is hearing from the Tampa Citizen Stakeholder Group. And so the idea of bringing this topic forward for this body and every other scientific agency that's working on these issues is to show that there actually is a need for or a consensus around nutrient removal, which is what this committee's focus is. Now, what we do with the beneficial or the reclaimed water, I think is probably a different question, but we at least understanding whether or not there was an ecological benefit of the current discharge and reaffirming this committee's policy positions on nutrient reduction and when time comes for beneficial reuse was something that the city was interested in.
The reduction that's required, is that, do we know the anticipated total volume or effect of the bay in terms of salinity?
I think there has been specific modeling done to the current outfall, but there's been similar studies for
Yeah, there was a graduate student at USF that applied the Tampa Bay model to evaluate different scenarios of full reduction to just keeping it as is. That dissertation is available, I believe.
It's fairly minimal salinity.
Yeah, it was fairly negligible, but again, that's just the only evaluation I know of to date looking at that from a modeling perspective.
I think, you know, so just to respond to some of what you just mentioned, I have nothing but respect for Sid and the long tenure and work that he's done within the region as it relates to MFLs and ecological resources in our important rivers. But, you know, we rely on peer-reviewed science or commissioned technical publications through contract work that's vetted through our technical advisory committee. I would argue, you know, Sid, if you're making contention about ecological benefits of that outflow, then, you know, submit it to a peer-reviewed scientific publication and see if it gets published. I think the overwhelming scientific literature, other areas where facilities that went to advanced treatment or reduced the amount of wastewater discharges to estuaries highlights the benefits to estuaries that result. And that's sort of the investments that are being made now, like in Boston, Chesapeake Bay region, many West Coast regions where nutrient inputs from wastewater discharges are have to be considered in maintaining the integrity of estuaries. So, from the standpoint, I respect your opinion. I respect what you're saying in terms of what the freshwater means to fish and wildlife resources. But I would argue that if you put that to the peer, and try to publish that in the peer review, you'd probably get some strong opinions on the contrary effects of some of these wastewater discharges that happen to go into our estuaries. So I'll leave it at that. I'm not trying to be contentious with what you're putting out there, but I would say just if you feel strongly about that, get it published, and I think it would hold more weight.
Well, one thing you said, the city of Tampa did go to advanced wastewater treatment, and much of the benefits of improvement we've seen in Hillsborough Bay has been related to that. I think what I proposed here in Tampa Bay, I don't know about submitting to a scientific journal. The scientific journals are full of articles about the beneficial effects of freshwater flow to estuaries, largely with regard to, and we don't want Tampa Bay to turn into a marine area. But I think more locally is where that should probably be done. And as my presentation said, when simulations of taking different amount of wastewater from Tampa Bay are done, look at the freshwater inflow budget, look at the nutrient budget, look at the potential effects on water quality and biological production. I think that could be done locally. That's more feasible than submitting it to a scientific journal. And I've got a few papers in scientific journals, but now I think we could do that locally. And again, it's the issue of quantity, that sort of thing. The one thing is, and we had all sorts of technical discussions, I won't go into it now. There's all sorts of things going on with regard to Tampa Bay, right, climatically and such, but that's for another day.
That'll be the last word. Is there any message we want to send to the policy board?
Can I make a motion?
Sure. I think one input. Some municipalities may benefit from a stronger DEP direct reuse set of regulations. With water as a valuable resource and our aquifers becoming more,
Hey Jennifer, do you hear us now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Apologies for that.
No problem, no problem. Are you ready for me?
We are. So if you want to share your presentation, you should have that control.
It's asking me to ask the presenter. There it is. Okay, gotcha. All right, how do we look?
See your presentation.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to present this morning and to present remotely, doing my part to reduce emissions. Everyone's hearing me okay?
Yes, come through.
Perfect. All right, so I'm here to give you an update on our work on the CCNP update. Just like you take your car in for service and you can either get an oil change or an engine rebuild, this is just the engine oil change. Every 5 years, the CCNP is updated. Every 10 years, it's revised. So we're just doing a little nip and tuck around the edges. All right, we were contracted in January to complete a number of tasks related to the CCNP update. And here they are listed. I'll run through them quickly and then give you some more details with regard to some of the new strategies. So for the most part, as I mentioned, we are not doing an overhaul of the CCNP. We're really just incorporating the recently approved strategies and recently completed projects that affect the business of the estuary program and the implementation of the CCNP. So things like the 2020 Habitat Master Plan update, the strategic plan, the latest report from the Nitrogen Management Consortium. The program has a new communications plan, and regionally important updates are in the Regional Resiliency Action Plan produced by the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. So we'll go through the body of the CCNP and make sure all of these new strategies and project accomplishments are appropriately referenced. We've also been asked to develop 2 new strategies. Number 2 on the list there is to develop and incorporate a climate strategy. This is the Climate Adaptation Action Plan, as well as to develop and incorporate the equity strategy. I'll say a little bit more about these 2 in a moment. When we get all done, we've also been asked to convert the CCNP, which currently exists as an online PDF flipbook, into an interactive website, much like the State of the Bay report has been implemented as part of the Tampa Bay's website. As sort of auxiliary projects, we're also developing a CCNP tracking tool, and we're doing an evaluation of the data and monitoring needs that might be necessary for a potential Tampa Bay Estuary Program boundary expansion. As your committee has discussed in the past, this would potentially include the Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound area, all the way up into the Alafai River watershed, so parts of northern Pinellas County and southern Pasco County. So to refresh your memory, here's a look at the table of contents of our current CCNP. And you can see there, the strategic plan is organized with a number of chapters that represent sort of the background information about the program. Very minor changes here for updating. The body of the strategic plan is here in these action plans: water and sediment, bay habitats, spill and prevention and response, invasive species, etc. And then along the right-hand side of this table of contents are all of the accompanying strategies and implementation strategies. So task 1, where we're incorporating recently approved strategies and updating recent project accomplishments. those will be incorporated throughout the strategic plan action chapters, as well as updating the references here. The new climate strategy will be focusing changes here on the climate change action plan, and then some of them will be incorporated as appropriate throughout the other strategies as well. And then finally, developing and incorporating the equity strategy. Those changes will primarily occur in the public education involvement and public access action plans. So I want to give you a little bit more information about how we're developing these two new strategies and receiving stakeholder feedback along the way. First, the new climate adaptation action strategy. You may recall that the Tampa Bay Estuary Program completed its climate vulnerability assessment in 2017, concurrent with the last revision of the CCMP. And EPA does provide a workbook for how to think about developing the climate change vulnerability assessment as well as the action plan. So we're focused here, building upon that vulnerability assessment to actually come up with a strategy for what to do. And the steps that the EPA outlines include deciding on a course of action, evaluating the list of vulnerabilities that were established based upon climate risk to the CCMP goals, risk to the program being able to implement its program goals. How do we deal with those? Can they be mitigated? Can we accept that risk for now and perhaps just monitor? Is there a way to transfer that risk out of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program goals to another entity? Or is it most appropriate to avoid the risk altogether because there is no action that can be taken, in which case the program might consider revising its goal? So we took the recommendations from the EPA's workbook and developed a climate action decision support tool that helps step through the decisions required to decide what to do about it, and if so, what are the actions available. So the 2017 Climate Vulnerability Assessment identified 54 risks to 15 goals of the program. And so we sort of fed those through a prioritization exercise where we asked, what are the highest likelihood and consequence risks? What are the most serious risks? And then we further filtered by identifying which ones staff ranked as high priority. So we ended up with a reduced list of 14 risks to 8 CCMP goals. Then we evaluated whether or not these risks could be mitigated. We checked in with the Climate Science Advisory Panel, Tampa Bay. We had one-on-one interviews with 17 research scientists and resource managers to come up with ways that those risks could be mitigated, or if not, if they could be transferred or simply accepted for now and monitored. So then we sort of screened those mitigation actions. There were over 100 ideas that were generated and collected from all of those experts. And we sort of fed them through this screening tool to figure out which ones were feasible, which are relevant to CCMP goals. Importantly, which ones are high priority for the lead partners, and which ones do we think we can make progress on in the next 5 years. So those that could achieve all of these criteria, then we decide if those mitigation actions are already in the CCMP. If not, we'll update the CCMP. If they are, then we'll implement those actions. So this gray box represents sort of the implementation phase. What do we need to know in order to either monitor or mitigate? And then this last gray box represents sort of the iteration, the evaluation phase. Let's say next CCMP revision, in 5 years, we evaluate if any progress is being made on those mitigation action project goals, and if those goals are, progress is being made on those goals, as well as reevaluating the risk itself. Has the risk changed in any way? And so this allows us to kind of loop back to the beginning. So where are we now? We've pretty much completed this screening process, and now we are finalizing our list of those risks that we have a mitigation action that seems doable. And now we're sort of cross-checking that with the CCMP to see if that action is already included or if it needs to be added. So all of the information that needs to be determined in order to implement, we have started collecting them in these matrices. And this is just an example of what all that information looks like all organized together. For example, this is related to the goal for bay habitats, related to recovering and maintaining at least 40,000 acres of seagrass. The climate risk to achieving that goal is that sea level rise may prevent adequate light penetrating to existing deeper seagrass. The decision was made, yes, we're going to try to mitigate that. There are some actions that we can take. One of them is to increase water clarity standard beyond the existing in order to provide for greater light penetration. When it comes time to evaluate if this action is moving the project goal forward, here is a sort of a project metric or milestone that we can look to in 5 years to see if this has been done. And meanwhile, we can be monitoring the risk and the climate impact with water quality and clarity monitoring. Lead partners are identified here. And then finally, this is the type of modification we would incorporate into the CCMP for water quality activity 1.2 related to the reasonable assurance updates and maintaining the database. We're going to add an activity to develop these new water quality clarity standards. So that's just an example of how we're kind of stepping through that decision tool, prioritizing what's feasible, what the partners have prioritized, and then developing a strategy forward. Now, the other new strategy that we're working on is related to the bipartisan infrastructure law equity strategy that Dr. Blake Simmons developed, and I believe presented to you at the last management meeting in May. This equity strategy was designed to ensure that benefits from the bipartisan infrastructure law funding flows through to distant communities, and Blake did data analysis based upon demographic data to identify where those disadvantaged communities are within the program boundary. And then he has also a decision tool to help select projects and make sure that those benefits are shared throughout the watershed. Our task then was to sort of build upon this strategy by identifying additional strategies for stakeholder engagements. So we want to make sure that not only did the benefits of projects flow through, but that the opportunities for involvement in issues and activities flow through as well. I'm going to pause a moment because it sounds like someone might be talking to me, but I'm not sure. Is that, are you trying to get my audio?
Very
is in
poor
and out.
connectivity, and so you cut in and
Yes, same for me. What would you like me to do? Continue or stop?
Just proceed. For the most part, it's just periodically you're cutting out.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about those difficulties. All right. So in order to develop a strategy for stakeholder engagement, we actually talk to our stakeholders. We did 20 one-on-one interviews with a select group of community leaders. Here's a few of them that we talked to. And we asked them about their interactions with and connections with the Bay and what barriers they might face. We asked them about their knowledge and interest in the activities of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and some of the issues and work of the program. And we asked them about their awareness and their interest in the mini grants as well. Through these interviews with community stakeholders, we got a lot of great feedback about their activities, their interests, generally a very positive sentiment around the Bay resources, protecting the Bay, and there were some identified barriers as well. So to summarize the essence of the strategy that we're proposing for engaging underserved communities, we're suggesting new stakeholder groups. We brainstormed some 40 new community groups in underserved communities that we could connect with, including community centers, education and youth services, outdoor groups, health and wellness groups, new media and arts and culture. We identified new outreach strategies, including the recognition that activities need to go to these underserved communities rather than requiring them to come to us. So joining or co-hosting events in the communities and looking at reframing issues to meet the interests of the communities, finding out what matters to them and where that overlap is between Tampa Bay Estuary Program work and priorities and those in the community. And strategies to better overlap our media channels, for example, community radio, newsletters, or even Facebook groups. And finally, the strategy includes targeted support, in particular for the Bay mini grants, providing project support not only in conceiving of projects and activities that align with the CCMP and the interests of the community, but also providing grant support for writing, budgeting, for managing projects, et cetera. So a little bit more hands-on with folks from underserved communities to make sure that the application and implementation isn't a barrier. So again, we collected all of this information and strategic thinking into updates to the CCMP itself. Here's an example from the public engagement activity, PE1, to promote public involvement in Bay restoration and protection. And here you can see that we've taken that advice, taken that strategy, and revised the particulars of the activities within the CCMP. So I'll wrap it up there. Just to recap, these are the focus of the contract tasks. We began around January, and we hope to wrap up late summer and then bring you a final draft of the CCMP update at your next meeting. And provided I can hear you, I'll be happy to take questions or just pop them in the chat. I have no audio.
Thank you. Good questions. Okay. Last item is.
Thank you.
Not clear.
The last agenda item is additional packet information quarterly progress report to the board's proposed 2024 meeting dates.
I'll just be brief. There's a screenshot of the Smartsheet dashboard that summarizes our progress, completing projects across all of the program's work. You can click on that. It's a hyperlink and you can drill down deeper into the details. And if you ever have any concerns or questions about how to use that Smartsheet dashboard, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to walk you through it. Just wanted to call your attention to the meeting dates that are listed in there. Those are the proposed meeting dates for 2024. Please take a look at those dates, and if you identify any conflicts that we really need to be aware of to reschedule, let me know, because I'd like to finalize those before the November board meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, November 9th in this room. It's Thursday because of the holiday on Friday. So look forward to seeing y'all then. Look forward to do good.
Do you have any final comments? Nope, the meeting is adjourned. I have to pass a, do I have to
We're good.
ask? Bear with me.
Yeah.